Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Gilbert Council Study Session for December 3rd, 2024. I'll call this meeting to order. We just have two items on our agenda this evening. First one is presentation and discussion on quiet zones within Gilbert. So excited to have this discussion, Jason.
Mayor, Council. My name is Jason Hafner. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the town. I'm joined today by Casey Ambrose. She's a CIP Project Supervisor. So in 2015, Council gave direction to staff to not actively pursue a quiet zone. However, when we had CIP projects where a rail was in the vicinity of the project, that we would apply safety elements of a quiet zone to that project. Today, we're here to give you an update on the status of projects that we've completed and that we've got planned, and then also to reaffirm that council direction from 2015. Today, I'm going to give you some of the background of both quiet zones and some of the elements of the town. Casey is going to talk to you about active and planned improvements, as well as some of the unplanned locations where we'll need to do anything if we ever do choose to pursue a quiet zone. And then we're going to end with the reaffirmation of that direction that we got. So in 2005, the Federal Rail Administration, or FRA as I'll probably call it several times tonight, instituted a rule for safety measure that any train crossing a roadway was required to sound a horn. Based on feedback that they got from cities and other towns, they implemented a second rule that allowed for a quiet zone if a town did certain safety construction projects to that crossing to make it, in their minds, as safe as the horn sounding. We wanted to point out the second bullet in particular, that quiet zones aren't necessarily an end of all noise from the trains, particularly because the engineers can still blow the horn if they feel unsafe or anytime they want, really. This is a list of some of the safety elements that are potentially required for crossings. Obviously, some of these are very easy. Landscape removal we do already. The signage upgrades, when we know the signs are out of date or not reflecting as they once did, we already go ahead and update those. However, some of these are a little trickier, particularly the median extension. If we were to implement a quiet zone anywhere in the town, we would have to extend some of the medians to an extent that it would block access to some of the current locations, businesses, and also some of the roadways that would be blocked by those median extensions. This is obviously a map of the rail through the town. The colors don't really matter for our conversation today, but what you can see by those numbers are all the crossings that we have. And there are a few things that we wanted to point out here. Gilbert averages about 4 trains per day, according to UPRR, that go through the town. We did an analysis of how many residences were within 1.5 miles of the rail, and we came up with 58,000 households that are within that area. We think that's probably about the number of places that are impacted by the sound. And the other thing that we learned during our analysis is that since the implementation of Gilbert 311, 33 addresses that are unique have submitted concerns about the train noise here in the town. So this is just a quick timeline of some of the things to keep in mind as far as council action. In 2005, like I said, is when the train horn rule became effective. In 2007, council determined not to pursue a quiet zone. In 2013, the issue came back before council, and the direction given to staff was to proceed with a diagnostic review. A diagnostic review is sort of like the first step if you're looking into a quiet zone. UPRR staff, as well as FRA officials will come out. You walk the locations, and they point out some of the safety elements that would need to be updated in order for that crossing in particular to qualify as a quiet zone. The results of that diagnostic review were brought back before council in 2015, and that's when council gave direction to staff to not actively pursue the quiet zone, but to include safety elements consistent with a quiet zone in any CIP project that was happening already and was near or bisecting the tracks. And that brings us to today. At this point, I'm going to turn it over to Casey Ambrose, and she's going to talk through some of the projects that are planned and current.
Thank you. All right, so we're going to discuss the improvements or the active and planned projects that we currently have in our system. So utilizing council's direction from 2015, we look at this, or the town has looked at this approach very similarly to how the town has approached a lot of our building projects and implementing LEED certification, which is creating buildings with sustainable elements. We don't necessarily chase the LEED certification, but we do apply those elements throughout our buildings. So the same concept is what we're applying here when we proceed with our projects that are bisecting the rail lines. We're applying elements that are appropriate to that project for safety measures that can apply to a quiet zone later without necessarily chasing the quiet zone itself. So we have had 3 active projects in the past. 2 are currently finished. The very first bullet and the bottom bullet have been completed. The middle bullet actually came in front of council a few months ago. We are moving forward with that. But the very top project was a railroad crossing improvement study. This was another diagnostic that we went back to the diagnostic review performed in 2013. What we used this diagnostic review was to verify that the improvements recommended in 2013 either didn't change, or if they did, we were making sure we were now implementing the right safety measures and the right opportunities with the right projects as we move forward. The last bullet project, the Cooper Road and Guadalupe project, this was a massive project. It did preemption at signals. It did incorporate a lot of elements to the quiet zone. However, as the top study came back to prove, those quiet zone elements and those safety elements have changed, and now additional improvements, should we choose in a future date to go after a quiet zone regulation, we would need to do additional improvements to that item. And then the middle project, again, came in front of council recently. We are looking to install medians at the Gilbert Road crossing. It was recognized by UPRR, and it was at their request that these medians be installed. Currently, the gate arms do not extend across all the travel lanes, and so these medians would help improve and prevent vehicles from going around the gate arms when they're down. So the total estimate at the bottom is for these projects. Now, again, keep in mind, these projects were created without a quiet zone in mind. They were created for other CIP, through our CIP program with our stakeholders. So they're not driven by a quiet zone. So the cost you're seeing at the bottom is the cost for the project with all the other safety improvements outside of a quiet zone. We just added a few smaller elements to these projects. Then we have a couple of planned studies in the future, currently going and in the future. A couple of them are for gap analysis for trails. We have a lot of trail users. Our trails do cross the railroad corridor, so we're looking at how to better improve and get our residents and pedestrians and trail users over or under or around the railroad. So we have 3 studies related to those. And then the third bullet down, the rail crossing elimination study. This is a study to look at all the crossings along the railroad corridor. What this is going to do is evaluate each of these crossings, and then it's going to rank each of these crossings where our high priorities are, where we should actually eliminate. And when we say eliminate the crossing, it means we're going to take it at a grade separation. And what that does is it separates the rail line from the actual vehicle traveling public. So either the cars are going to go over the rail, or the rail is going to go over the cars. And we need to do that with a study to see where are the most important areas or the high priority areas are. We have planned for 3 projects in the future, and that'll come up on the next slide. But those are projects we have looked at. This study could change and rearrange some of those projects and where those locations are at. So these are our planned improvements. These are the 3 projects I alluded to. This is what that rail study is going to show, hopefully, or maybe it'll change. But these projects are programmed out into future years so we can get the rail study underway, really plan for our future. These projects are also tied to the Prop 479 funding, which is also why they're planned for future events. But we have these 3 crossings. Again, these are planned projects for safety concerns. These do not have to do with a quiet zone. So all of these projects we're showing are on the CIP books. They've been on the CIP books. They were presented, but not for quiet zones. They were presented for other CIP needs or town needs. So then if the town were to explore a quiet zone, we do have some unplanned improvements that need to happen. That's what was shown in the diagnostic review we did previously in the past couple of years. So of the 16 crossings we have in the town, 13 would still need some kind of upgrades to them. 13 are not planned in our current CIP program. We don't have any projects close to the vicinity of a rail with these areas or locations. 2 of those crossings are maintenance only, so that goes back to just landscape removal, roadway markings, and signage upgrades. 8 of those crossings would require some form of maintenance or construction improvements, and those construction improvements can vary from warning systems, modifications to gates, signage, changes in traffic lanes, medians, sidewalks, even fencing requirements for pedestrians so that they're forced to look up and down the railroad tracks. So a lot of different moving parts we'd have to nail down for these projects. And then we have 3 private crossings we'd have to address. What it is those crossings are private today, so what that means is the train horn does not sound at those locations because the train engineer is not expecting a vehicle or a pedestrian to be on the tracks at the time that they're crossing this location. We would need to, in order to go to a quiet zone, we would need to create those into a public crossing. And once we create that as a public crossing, then the train horn would now need to sound because now they are anticipating pedestrians and vehicles to be crossing at those locations. And that train horn would remain in place until we actually got approval of a quiet zone from the Federal Rail Association and Union Pacific Railroad. As you can see, we are estimating the cost of these future projects. They are not programmed. They are not planned in our CIP book. They would be solely driven by the council choosing to chase after a quiet zone, and we're estimating those to be at about $86 million. So with that, we're coming back to council to reaffirm the council direction to continue to add quiet zone safety improvements. Again, just adding elements to current existing projects that when we bisect a rail line with a project, we would add certain elements that make sense or are appropriate to that project. And then to reaffirm that we are not pursuing a quiet zone designation at this time. And with that, we will take any questions.
Thanks, Casey. Does anyone have questions for Casey or Jason at this time? Councilmember Bongiovanni.
Thank you, Mayor. This may be the dumbest question ever asked from this dais, but can't we just make longer rails or longer gates so they go past the median?
Yes, you can, but most of them go to what is called a quad gate system. And in order to do that, you would have a gate closing in each direction, both in the north and southbound lanes. Well, in this case on Gilbert Road, it would be in the north and southbound lanes. And so they would have a gate on the outside and a gate on the inside lane. I don't know the extent of how long the gate arms can possibly be, but then that is also a major cost increase to the arm system that's to be supported.
Okay, and at $86 million, 33 complaints, 2.66 million per complaint. I need my own quiet zone if we approve this. I mean, that makes no sense to me whatsoever.
Any other comments or questions? Councilmember Tilke.
Thanks, Mayor. I guess my comment is I'd like to keep the current policy that we have in place. I think that it doesn't justify the cost. And the railroad was here long before anybody moved in. So I appreciate those who don't like the noise, but I can hear it.
Me too.
Yeah, and I'm fine with it. Thank you.
Councilmember Kaprowski.
Casey, could you, I might have missed it, but in regards to the projects, you included those 3 private crossings that would have to be converted. So without those conversions to public crossings, are you saying that the entire town could not be eligible for the quiet zone?
No, the town could still be eligible for a quiet zone. It just makes it a little bit more difficult. There's other improvements. We may need to do more significant improvements to other crossings. It kind of is a very give and take relationship with what you do at one crossing can affect what you may or may not need to do at another crossing. There's some other impacts to how that applies, but no, we don't necessarily need to make those public crossings. But if we do not, there's other impacts that the town needs to be aware of by not doing that.
Okay. In the planning history, there was one component that was excluded. I think around 2019, 2020, there was a study that evaluated the railroad crossings to determine what would need to be changed for these quiet zones. I know we haven't had a lot of complaints coming in through 311, but it is something that I've heard from residents over the past several years that it is desired, but I can see that I don't want to put this huge capital cost into this if it's not going to have that same benefit. And we're also talking about something separate, and that's doing the grade separated crossings. I know that in Prop 479, all of Gilbert's projects are grade separated crossings, and I'm wondering whether for the next 20 years out of that program, whether we want to actually devote those funds only to those types of projects, because we may have greater needs that would serve more of the public. So I guess from my perspective, I would be more inclined to, I would like to see the quiet zone, but I don't know whether it's worth that capital cost and the other priorities that we may have. And I'd also like to know in the future where we would rather spend potential regional monies aside from all those grade separated crossing projects, because I know those can be very expensive. And I do see the benefit in maybe 1 or 2 more in the community, but not every single one.
Mayor, council member, there is a number of funds in Prop 479 for grade separated crossings, but it is not the entirety of the ALCP. It's probably closer to half as far as the project number goes. There's also other benefits to the town of us removing at-grade crossings. UPRR currently has a rule in place that you have to eliminate 3 at-grade crossings in order to build a new at-grade crossing. So in order to build a new at-grade crossing, were the town ever to want to do such a thing, we would have to eliminate 3 current crossings. And so part of the reasoning for putting those 3 grade separations into the ALCP as part of Prop 479 was so that we would have the opportunity someday to build an at-grade crossing if we were so inclined.
Thank you for the additional information.
That at-grade crossing might be on Neely, perhaps. So I'll just throw one out there that doesn't have a crossing in place at this moment that could be in the future required or desired. Vice Mayor Anderson.
Grade separation for railroads is extremely expensive, and I'd be surprised if we could do it for what's shown here. Does the railroad or the federal government have any money to contribute towards this?
Mayor, council member, Casey mentioned the grade separated crossing study. If council remembers, we brought that before you. We applied for an FRA grant to apply for that funding to do that study. We feel if we're successful, it will help us be more successful in the future in applying for the same fund source to design and construct those grade separated crossings. So from a staff point of view, our philosophy is if we can get FRA sort of with some skin in the game by funding this study, and then we can set that study up. Part of the study will do 15% design plans for 3 locations. And we think if we're able to get that study, the funding for that study and move forward with it, that those 15% design plans will help us be very competitive for future grant funds from FRA in the future to help pay for the design and construction. And if that happens, we could reallocate those ALCP funds to another project in the town.
I tend to agree with Councilmember Tilke. The railroad's been here a long time, and the town has grown up around it. It's kind of like an airport, and that's the reason airports buy so much land around the airport itself, is to prevent this from happening. But I agree that the railroad was here first, and sometimes you just have to live with that.
So I will say, I have a funny story that just happened in the past couple weeks. I had to get down to Chandler Gilbert, or like I like to call it, Gilbert Chandler Community College one morning, and there was a train stuck on the tracks. And I live at Lindsay and Elliott and had to get to Gilbert and Pecos, right? So I had to go east on Elliott to Greenfield, and thank goodness for that crossing because I could get under the track. The train wasn't that far in this case, but it was the only road that I could go to go south to go back to Gilbert Chandler Community College. And that was, we've had the train stuck before, and from my house, I mean, Councilmember Tilke and I live, gosh, a stone's throw from each other, and the Lindsay crossing, I can hear it cross Gilbert Road, Elliott Road, Lindsay Road, Warner Road, and Val Vista from my house if we have our back door open. No kidding, every single one of those crossings, and I'm sure you can too. And like has been said, the train, this town wouldn't exist if it wasn't for a train spur, in reality. And I've been on council 9 years total, and maybe get one email a year, about train noise, and 33 complaints on Gilbert 311 just doesn't justify the cost. The only thing that would change is if we needed to add a new crossing, and I used Neely as an example, I think it's a perfect example in this case, if we needed to add a crossing there, and I think that's been our hesitation all along, is we know that we can't do that because it would cost an arm and a leg to add some new crossings. And I just don't think that we can justify that at this point. I think there's just too many things that we need here in the community that we can justify the use of funds so much better than that. And I have a friend who's a realtor, and she told me this story once, that she took a family to see a house, and they crossed a railroad track, saw the house, left the house, crossed a railroad track, went and had coffee near the house, crossed the railroad track, left the coffee, crossed the railroad track, and as they were talking, she said, "What did you think about living that close to a railroad track?" They never noticed it. So if you're moving into a house and you're not looking at the things that are around you, shame on you, right? And we build homes and neighborhoods on that train track, and I'm sure those are the people that we're getting the complaints from. And I can tell you, there are train drivers that are blasting those horns in the middle of the night sometimes. And this isn't gonna help that, because they can still, like one of you said, they can still, if they feel there's a safety issue, blow that horn. So I can't justify this at this time. Thank you for your presentation. It was great. And out of 58,000 households, how many households do we have in Gilbert, Jason? Do you know? I know it's probably over 92,000, I'm guessing.
Kyle's guessing about 100,000.
100,000. So a little more than half are impacted by train noise. And how do we choose where to go, quiet zones versus not quiet zones? I think that's an even bigger mess that we would get ourselves into. Yeah. So thank you. You got direction?
Thank you.
Mayor Peterson?
Yes.
Councilmember Buckley has a comment.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot that she was on for study session. Councilmember Buckley, do you have a comment?
She is muted. Mayor, I'll try to get a hold of her and see if she's having any issues.
Okay, thank you. We can get, I don't know if she's got, has a.
Oh,
even if
can
she
you hear
has a-
me now?
Yes, we can.
I'm so sorry. No, I just wanted to say I'm going to be short and quick, and I don't want to reiterate and say all the same things everyone else has said, but there's no way I would support this right now. There's so many other really important needs for our community right now that I just can't support this.
Thank you, Councilmember.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, both.
Thank you.
Next item up for discussion this evening is the TNR assistance pilot. Good evening, Robert.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Thank you very much for having me this evening. Robert Carmona with Parks and Recreation. We'll see. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about the pilot program that we discussed last time. So before we get started, just a little brief history on the Trap Neuter Return program. We've talked about TNR a lot quite recently. This is just a brief reminder that it is allowed on private property per the current ordinance, just not allowed on town-owned property. Quick look back at history. It really started in 2015, where the ordinance first came into place that it was unlawful to feed or place food outdoors, specifically at the riparian preserve, except with some of the categories that we've discussed below. When it was updated in 2018, it did include all town-owned property and public right-of-way. And it could be, upheld if the Parks and Recreation Director could authorize specific people at particular locations. Went one too fast, but that all took us to April 16th, which is the last time we discussed this item. At that point, we did talk about council requesting staff to proceed in drafting the framework of a pilot program. We're coming back tonight to briefly talk about that. And at the time that we discussed it, we were looking at a total not to exceed $10,000 for that first year of the pilot program. So with that being said, really the overall goal is to make sure that we're protecting wildlife from the impacts of the feral cat population, but also supporting the nonprofits who are managing the feral cat populations. And with that, we use that as the main drivers to come up with what that pilot program could look like. So with that being said, we are looking at starting that program on January 1st, which would be available and specifically designated for those nonprofits doing TNR services. This would be available through the town website with all the information being there. And as we discussed, it would be not to exceed $10,000 that would be requested through the use of contingency funds, since that wasn't a budgeted item at the beginning of the fiscal year when we first discussed it. It would also be separate from the town's nonprofit assistance funds, which had already been largely distributed. So this would be a separate program from that overall. And at the end of the program, or the utilization of all the funds, the department would provide an update to council to be able to discuss, all the happenings that took place from that pilot program. To dive a little bit deeper, we took a look at the eligibility requirements for assistance, tried to make it, friendly from the perspective of really allowing the TNR, nonprofits to perform those services, but also making sure that it was within proper, confines of what we'd like to see. So some of those being to make sure that there's permission from the private property owners, the agreements being made with the local, vet clinics where those neutering services would be taking place. And then obviously a history of having those TNR programs and services, just to kind of name a few of some of the things we'd be looking for in our partners for this. Couple of the other highlights, these were some of the suggestions from the department. We would expect that $10,000 would move relatively quickly. There's a couple of different nonprofits that work within this sector with TNR. So we're looking at a $1,500 max to at least start per organization, so that we're able to distribute the funds to several and create those relationships. But if those funds were still available, those organizations being able to come back and ask for additional funds. In those applications, making sure that we have a couple of different departments, including Parks and Recreation, legal procurement, verify that those nonprofits are in good standing and would meet the criteria that we've set forward. And then have it be a reimbursement-based program, so not having that $1,500 be upfront, but have that be reimbursed when those nonprofits are able to show us the reports of what took place and those receipts. We would then be able to reimburse those funds through the pilot program. Some of that implementation reporting to make sure that we're capturing the right data to be able to show council into the future would be to understand that having those monthly progress reports to understand how many cats were trapped and returned, what those expenses were, and any issues that encountered throughout those services. And then being able to have that final report, summarizing the activities and outcomes when it came to those specific colonies. You guys know me well enough. Normally I don't do that, but I'm a little tired this evening. The kids have not been sleeping, but being able to have those available so that when we do come back to council, it has a very global grasp at the success of the program or what happened within it. And with that, I know that's a broad overview, but happy to take any questions or suggestions on sort of the direction of that pilot program.
Thanks, Robert. We'll try to be specific about it.
Thank you.
Just kidding.
I'm not gonna
Vice
live
Mayor
that
Anderson.
down.
Robert, have you been in contact with these organizations? Because the last time that they were here and we had discussion about this, left with what I felt was the impression that it was free-for-all time to do TNR in Gilbert. And I don't want them to think that. I want them to abide by the rules of this program very carefully and monitor them very closely.
Yeah, Mayor and Vice Mayor, that we've talked to a few of them, but not in depth about the actual pilot program. We wanted to make sure to have that conversation first with council to make sure that we're going in the right direction. But our next step would be that we would have that outreach with the organizations and understand what that looks like. I think we've been very clear what the ordinance overall states, and I think the pilot program through the application, we could better define what that outlook looks like and what those expectations are as part of the program. So our hope is that we continue to build those relationships as part of it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Tilke.
Thanks, Mayor. Robert, I was curious, when the nonprofit requests reimbursement, I'm assuming the information they'll share with you is the address of the property owner. And my question is, Town of Gilbert only, and how does County Island properties, are they impacted?
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember, I think that's a great question. I think the way we were approaching it was really just the Town of Gilbert properties, well, not Town of Gilbert, within the private properties within the Gilbert boundaries was how we were initially approaching it. But if there's other direction from the council, we can discuss it. But that's at least how we were going to approach the application process overall.
So I would say within the Gilbert planning area, which incorporates the Maricopa County Islands that are within our planning area. Does that make sense?
Yep. Thanks.
Councilmember Bongiovanni.
Thank you, Mayor. Rob, I take it that we're going to be able to tell the difference between a feral cat and domestic cat. So, if a cat's wearing a thing that says Tinkerbell, we're not going to neuter it, right? I mean, we're going to make sure that we can somehow say this is a domestic cat versus this is a feral cat.
Yeah, Mayor, Councilmember Bongiovanni, I think that goes to the vetting process of the types of nonprofits that we work with who do this, consistently across the valley and understanding some of the successes and challenges that they have had, and make sure we partner with the right organizations who have the trained professionals, as we kind of talked about during the eligibility. And it's also making sure we're monitoring any issues that happen within the pilot program. So if that did happen by accident, that we were able to understand that right away and understand some of the implications. But overall, I think that's part of the process and partnering with the right groups and making sure that that application is able to show that the training is there with the right types of people in the organization.
Thank you, Robert. Took me 4 years, but we have a pilot program in place since I was the one that called a cat killer in 2020, amongst other things. So I appreciate finally being able to get this across the finish line, at least for a pilot program and $10,000 worth. So I hope that it continues into the future. I know that the organizations here in Gilbert would very much appreciate that. And I know that there's a process. They tip cats' ears. They tip an ear when it's been TNR'd and put back. But the problem is that the the people that go out and do it on their own independently sometimes grab people's family cats and take them. And hopefully those family cats have already been neutered too if they're out and about in the neighborhoods. And it's mostly the feral ones that we're really concerned about and multiplying. So thank you all very much. I appreciate it. I don't have anyone else with any comments, so well done.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
Hope you get some sleep tonight.
We'll try.
All right, those were the only two items that we had on our agenda this evening, and I will go ahead and adjourn the study session.